Hi there, I'm John Michael Garapi and this is Popcorn Roulette. Each episode I invite a guest on the show, they suggest a movie, we both get together and we watch the movie, and then we talk about the movie. Today with me I have Tiffany Beggins-Stearns. Tiffany, how are you?
I'm so excited to be here.
Great,
I'm great.
great.
Yeah.
Like, what do you do?
What do I do?
What do you do?
I live and breathe and exist.
Good call. Most people, they come on the show, they do not list those things at all. They're not living, breathing.
They're not living. No, actually, I am the training coordinator at HC Media. So I'm like the person you would go to, you know, learn about editing and learn about making a show.
And learn about what HC Media does, the orientation class itself as well.
I believe you were in my class.
I was in 2 of your classes technically.
Not long ago.
Yep, learn Adobe Premiere off of you. That's how we're editing this show.
Oh yeah, because I'm good. I'm good. I am so good.
We are talking today about Garden State, written, directed, and starred with Zach Braff. Yeah. Also featuring Natalie Portman, Peter Sarsgaard, and Ian Holm, who's making a return visit because he was in our Fifth Element episode. He's like the older cleric in Fifth Element.
I've never seen Fifth Element.
Oh, well, there you go. Why did you choose, not the Fifth Element, why did you choose Garden State?
So Garden State for me, let's back up. So when I grew up, I was all into romantic comedies and Disney movies. I was that type of person.
Yeah.
And I don't even remember why or how I watched Garden State. I think it's because I was watching Scrubs. But it was just, I'm like, hey, this looks interesting. You know, I like Zach Braff. I'll give it a try. And it was the first indie movie that I had ever watched or anything like that.
Yeah.
So it was like it opened up this whole other world.
So I don't think people actually understand just how independent this movie was and how much it blew up almost immediately upon making it. Zach Braff had a name for himself in the first place.
Yeah.
He had like a season of Scrubs behind himself.
I think he had, I was looking at this earlier. I think Scrubs started in 2001 and this came out in 2004. So he had a couple seasons.
But you know, television and movies don't work at the same speed.
Yeah,
so
true.
he had only done so much with Scrubs by the time he had got greenlit to do this project.
Yeah.
But a lot of it was just him struggling to try to find people to give him the money for it.
Yeah,
you know?
I think it was like $2 million or something. It was like a really, I mean, that's
$2
million is a lot to me, but that's a really low
I think
budget.
he himself said that like he was like when he was writing who he wanted in this movie, he wrote down that like, oh well, I'd like a Natalie Portman type, a Peter Sarsgaard type, and an Ian Holm type. Never thinking he'd get those people, and like everybody was like, bing, 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 let's do it.
Yeah.
You know, just crazy how that works sometimes.
But, no, I was gonna say, but that movie for me was, you know, something. So when you ask me like what movie, I'm like, I don't know. I want to make something like make myself sound smart and whatever. But I'm like,
put something in my wheelhouse. This is what I know.
But when I think about like movies in the types of movies that I like now, or the types of stories that I like, that was really the movie that kind of started all of that interest for me in that kind of coming of age movies and that type of indie, a different type of romantic comedy in a way. So I picked it because I wanted to revisit it because I actually haven't watched it.
Yeah.
In maybe 5 or 6 years, so it was good to revisit.
Why don't we explain for our audience exactly what Garden State is? What's the synopsis of that movie?
So the Garden State is basically about Zach Braff's character
is
Andrew Largeman. I was like, ugh. But he's coming back home to New Jersey after his mom passes away, and I think he's been gone since he was about 16. So it's kind of him coming home and reconnecting with his father and old friends and just people and kind of exploring, you know, your hometown and coming back to that place that may or may not really be, you know, your home.
Yeah, yeah.
It's kind of a theme going on.
I was mentioning Manic Pixie Dream Girl beforehand.
Yeah.
Do you know what that is?
So I actually didn't, and I'm glad you brought it to my attention because I looked it up and I was like, oh, there's a name for that.
There's a name for the type of character, yeah. Yeah,
that kind of character I like. So, and it's kind of interesting because I didn't view it as a negative thing, and it really kind of is. If you
it's a mixed bag depending upon how you look at it.
So it's that Natalie Portman character who's just like this quirky, you know, like because Zach Braff's character is very sad and depressed and kind of just disconnected, I guess.
Yeah.
And Natalie Portman's character in this movie is very like. She's quirky and she's got epilepsy and so she's got all her like things and her house is full of hamsters and it's just she's very different and she kind of shows Andrew Largeman that kind of side, that different side, like, you know, that different approach to viewing the world, I guess.
A lot of people want to compare Garden State to The Graduate because of the whole entire, like, coming of age during that time period. I actually like comparing this movie more to Harold and Maude. You ever see Harold and Maude?
Harold and Maude.
So you know what I'm talking about when I say, like, oh, because Maude, she is a very old manic pixie dream girl.
Yeah, I would have never thought of that.
Because Harold is like this depressed young man, and she's revving him up and pushing him through and getting him along.
Yeah.
I mean, the major criticism towards the, now the word's becoming cumbersome, manic pixie dream girl, is that like they themselves don't really get a plot. Their whole entire point is that they push forward the main character who needs, you know, this, you know, would otherwise wouldn't actually do anything on his own.
But I think that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, I was reading some criticisms, and it's a relatively new term, so I didn't know that too.
Yeah, no, it's kind of like a decade or so old.
But I don't think that's negative. If that's the story you want to tell, that's the story you want to tell. You know, not every story has to have the female character be, you know, strong and bold. And I love strong female characters. Like that's But that's not the story. It's not about Natalie Portman's character. It's about Zach Braff's character. It's about him. It's his kind of own personal, you know, story. So I think that's okay to have that.
Yeah.
But I like that. It was interesting because I was reading about Manic Pixie Dream Girl. Now I'm going to stumble over it. And they listed things as one of my other favorite movies is Beauty and the Beast. And so they said that Belle in Beauty and the Beast, I don't know how well versed you are in Beauty and the Beast world.
I know Beauty and the Beast well. Yeah.
Could be considered a Manic Pixie Dream Girl.
She can
which is
be,
interesting.
but that's a strange choice.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't quite fit into the same category.
Yeah. Yes and no. So I thought that was interesting. She's just there to, you know, make the Beast, you know, realize his mistakes.
I think there are obvious characters that are like perfect for this sort of thing, where it's just like, oh, this girl is off the wall. And I think being off the wall is necessary. You can't choose someone like Pinkie Pie from My Little Pony because she is just manic. There's no, you know, it's about the relationship than anything else.
Who's the other one that comes up? Zoe Deschanel from New Girl and 500 Days of Summer, she was listed. But that's another person that I think of when I think of that kind of trope, like very just quirky and fun. And
yeah.
Love that.
Let's talk about the soundtrack, because Zach only really won one award for this movie, and it was for putting the soundtrack together.
And it was a Grammy. It wasn't even a video. It wasn't even a movie-related
He gets a
award.
Grammy for like the strangest thing. He like didn't do any music himself.
No.
He was just like, I'm going to select these songs, put them together, and get a Grammy for having done that.
Like
all the work he does, and this is what he gets.
Weird.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting soundtrack too. And I can't think of any of the other. I know like the Shins are on it.
The Shins are on
there's
it.
An old
Coldplay, 07, Iron and Wine,
the Iron and
Wine, and Frau.
Yeah.
Who closes out the movie at the end.
And this is cool too, because I was always into boy bands and that, you know, girl bands. And like this was one of those first movies, you know, or first soundtracks that I was like, oh, indie music. Okay, all right, I'm into this.
Yeah.
And it fits so well, and they're like, it's cool because like when I just listened to this like today on Spotify, and you can, like, every song was so well chosen for like the scene that it was in, and like when I listen to it, I go, oh, that's from this scene, and that's from
even the Paul Simon choice, just in the middle of that, of like Only Boy in New York.
Only Boy in New York.
Yeah.
That's a great scene though.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
But it fits so well, and they're not songs that I would have thought of.
I think a lot of people discovered the Shins as soon as that movie came out. That it was something for like a lot of people to all of a sudden jump into.
And I'm still not like a big like super mega. Well, I guess I kind of am, but like I'm like, oh, I like the Shins. Okay, I can be down with that. And it was the only song that I don't like is the song at the end of the credits. I think it's I forget what it's called, Long Winding Road or something like that. It's the last song. It's not even in the movie. It's just in the credits. And I'm like, this is the one that's kind of out of place.
Yeah.
But everything else is just, What's the other one? Colin Hay, I'll Never Get Over You. I love that song. And I think that comes up in the Natalie Portman's Hamster, when she has to bury her hamster.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
well, let's talk
sorry,
about
I'm like
that.
jumping ahead all over the place. I'm
it's
so
okay.
excited.
I love it when people jump ahead because that allows me to like jump questions in.
Yeah.
Like I got a question.
Okay.
One of them is that like we see two funerals in this movie.
We do.
One is Zach's or Andrew Largeman's mother, who he comes back for, and the other one is Sam's hamster.
Yeah.
How do those two funerals compare?
You know, I am more sad about the hamster funeral.
Are you? Yeah.
You know, and I think it's interesting because with the hamster funeral, this is like going to sound so silly, but there's so much more emotion in it, and it's like, it's weird. There's
a strange depth. Like, Andrew starts making a joke, Sam cuts him off and says that that's not funny.
No, and I don't know if it has to do with Andrew Largeman being so detached, and you find out later that he's kind of the reason that his mom is paralyzed.
Yeah.
And you find out, maybe, he's the reason that.
It doesn't hurt that his mom was both paraplegic and depressed.
Yep.
And like this felt like a fitting end for her in a sense.
Yeah.
Even though it was too soon.
And I feel like he was almost kind of like accepting of it. It wasn't as emotional. And then you go to, and he's a very different character. And then you see Sam, Natalie Portman's character, with her hamster, and just those words like, "Oh, you were so good. I'm sorry I didn't."
Like she had made a mistake. That's how that hamster had died.
Yeah.
That shouldn't have happened.
Yeah, and it was just so much. I was like watching it, and I was like, please don't cry, please don't cry. It's just a hamster. It's just a hamster. It's fine. But there was so much more emotion in that than. So it's different. I didn't even think about that. The two very different ways of dealing with loss and death and.
Well, because Andrew, this movie takes place over, how long do you think this movie takes place over?
Oh, it's only a few days.
It's like 3 days.
I never realized that until I rewatched it.
You can like do the math and be like, oh, these events happen on these 2 days, these on this day, Like he goes through a massive transformation in the process of like 3 or 4 days. Like how believable is that? Like how can a person go through all of that in that small amount of time?
I think after being away for so long, I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like you've been away for so long, you've been desensitized for so long, and you come back and here's this, you're in your hometown, and here's this new person thrown in, and you're like, okay, this is different.
I mean, technically, Zach Braff did an excellent job of making the audience feel just as isolated as Andrew did, because there are tons of scenes where it just kind of moves through slowly, but like at the same exact time, like it's full of like little details. Do you have a favorite little detail scene out of curiosity? Because this movie is full of them. But like picking one out at any one point in time. I know I was putting you on the spot.
Well, there's things like, I know we had talked before the show, like the scene with the shirt with the wallpaper. I think it's is it his aunt that makes him a shirt? His aunt makes
a shirt out of the same material? I don't even understand how that works. Did she make a wallpaper shirt? Did she make a shirt wall? I don't know.
I don't know how, but something like that where it's just, I love, and like one of my other favorite filmmakers is Wes Anderson. So like that was a very Wes Anderson, like very static.
Very quirky. Which is
shot.
interesting to say that because now you got me wondering when Wes Anderson movies came out. Like when did Rushmore come out officially? Because that was his big breakthrough movie.
I don't know.
And like would Braff have actually looked at that and be like, can we do that?
But it was just I liked that, and that was at the beginning of the movie, and I liked that as a setup for this character, like kind of living his life kind of blended in and kind of fading into the background, which is kind of really what he did. And it was like, visuals.
Yeah.
So stuff like that is really good. I also like, this is silly because I'm jumping way back to the end, but the last scene when they're in the airport and the door closes or the door opens and that light frames them.
Yeah.
One, found out in the commentary that was an accident. But two, like that was something that really shows kind of hope and what's going to happen in the future. It's like a weird visual cue that just was completely serendipitous.
I get the impression that a lot of these shots were accidents. That like I give Braff a lot of credit for this because he probably saw it and was like, can we do that? Can we film like the airport scene where he's like washing his face, looking in the mirror, and then he walks towards the camera and all the water spigots turn on. And it's like you couldn't have really have thought about that. That had to have been something that just either happened to you on the spot or happened to you while you were writing. You're just like, why don't I just include that,
Good. And that's like the fun of indie filmmaking is that you kind of just, some of it's very guerrilla style or some of it's very, you make things work that might not necessarily work, for a blockbuster movie. You're like, I want to put this in there.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of other little things. I don't know. I love all the scenes like that are in between the moments in between scenes where he's like driving on his scooter and things like that where you really.
The soundtrack helps a lot here because it's really just watching him process, I suppose, is what much of this movie is.
And as somebody who loves to drive, and if I'm having a bad day, I'm like, I'm going to take the long way home and just drive and listen to music. I'm like, okay, that's something that resonates with me, and I like that. And I'm like, okay, this makes me feel not so weird that I do this.
Yeah. You mentioned the concept of home beforehand. I'm going to jump back to that because this is a point that Andrew brings up. He left and somehow his house wasn't his home anymore. When does your house no longer become your home?
This is one of the other parts that kind of made me cry. So I moved a couple years ago, and my dad sold the house that we grew up in, and I was just like, but it was sad, but at the same time, there became a point where like my parents had gotten divorced, and my dad was fixing the house, and I'm like, this is not our house anymore.
Right.
You know, and you realize as an adult, you know, my husband and I bought a house. We're doing it on our own, you know, all this stuff. And like, that's home now.
You're putting everything into this house now.
Yeah, and that idea of home is changeable and not necessarily maybe a place, but maybe it's people, a group of people, a person. So it's like, so I liked that, and that was a theme that I hadn't thought of before, because, you know, when I watched this movie when I was in college, I was like, oh yeah, my house, I'm gonna live here forever, it's great.
Yeah.
But as an adult, I was like, oh, I love that. It's just, it's almost comforting, like that, you know, the places that you call home can change, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And I kind of liked that. It doesn't have to be a concrete.
This is one of those strange movies, because you had suggested watching this movie, and then I went and watched the movie, and then we ended up getting interrupted. We couldn't get a chance to actually film, so it was like a few months passed. I was like, oh, I gotta watch Garden State again. I gotta actually, I don't really want to watch this movie. And then I watched it, and I was like, this movie's good. You know, why didn't I not want to watch it? But a lot of it is just these extra little details that seem to pop up that you just didn't really, and you know, it's not huge. It's not like a watch it 10 times. You're not going to see more details. I don't think more than a second viewing is going to give it to you. But like just those little things, like during the time when Andrew's asking his father, like, how are you doing? You can hear him grumble under his breath, besides that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? You know, and it's just like, oh, that fits his character so much. You can see just how he's doing an excellent job understating the part intentionally.
There are just so many little things like that, like you said, I watched it for the first time as an adult in my 30s, and I was like, oh, this movie carries so much more weight as an adult, you know, with the idea of loss and the idea of home and the idea of life changing and moving on, or not being sure of the future. So I was like, oh, okay. It's one of those movies, I think the older you get, I think the more, or maybe not the older you get, but like where I am in my life right now, this resonates a lot with me more than it did as a college student. So it was really, really nice to revisit and get a little sad. And
while we're talking about Andrew and his father, there seems to be a very important point here that is coming up, where like his dad just wants Andrew to be happy. How important is it to be happy?
Ooh, I love this. This is such a great question, and it's funny because like this year I've kind of been exploring that on my own, like that concept. You know, as an adult, you know, I've been reading some lovely self-improvement books, and it's just it's interesting. How important is it to be happy, or like what does happy look like? Like that's so different.
We have this idea in our heads, especially it's even more so now than in 2004, because we have a Facebook generation which we must post things about us having a good time, drinking or eating something, or being at this exotic location, or being like with my significant other. But like you know, like, is it important for us? Is keeping up appearances important? That's another subject altogether. But is actually being that happy like important?
And I think it is, and I think it's different. Like you have that Facebook culture, but for me, I've kind of, in rewatching this movie and kind of, you know, going with the themes of books I've been reading, it's like that idea of happiness is like it's in the moment kind of thing. So like that's why this movie is great, because it's almost like a series of moments, and it's not, you know, you're not happy all the time, and Andrew's not happy. You know, by the end of this movie, I don't feel like he's, you know, happy or whatever, but he has that like glimmer of it, like, okay, this could be something that...
For somebody who says we're just gonna be okay, that's his baseline, where he's aiming for, like, he seems to be genuinely happy at the end.
Yeah, and it's really, really interesting that it's so simple. It's just as simple as connecting with another person. And I thought that was really interesting. I'm like, okay, it's like that's enough to make him happy. Like, what's enough to make me happy? Is it just going home and not having dishes in the sink? Like, you know, I think that's very different for everybody, and what everybody thinks is important to being happy is different for everybody.
Let me before I forget to do it, let me bring out the negative review.
Ooh.
We get one of these in every episode.
Oh, I love it. I have a friend who hates Zach Braff, so.
Does he? I mean, I can see it. It doesn't take much to imagine, like, well, let's get to this person's negative review, because they aren't so happy with the movie. This comes from Derek Smith on Cinematic Reflections. You already don't like the name. Derek Smith.
Derek Smith. That sounds like a fake name. Fake news.
The fact that his best friend is still a pot-smoking underachiever, his new girlfriend deals with a serious medical condition on a daily basis, and his father is left to deal with the grief of his recently deceased wife are of little concern in a cinematic universe where the world revolves around only Andrew. The problems of others are only given the screen time when they directly affect his journey to self-realization. As a light, fluffy comedy about the difficulty of adapting to adult life, Garden State has its moments, but the deep, dark themes it brings into play early on are never given the seriousness they deserve, and it often feels like Braff, as well as his character, are in need of a reality check.
Ooh.
So,
okay.
Is that being fair in any sense?
I think it is. But only because I took a step back and when I was watching this over the weekend, I was like, oh, they never really wrapped up his dad. Like, the last thing you get with his dad is like him walking back into his room.
Yeah, his dad is left in a terrible place, really.
Yeah.
I mean, something he'll have to come out of himself eventually.
But this movie isn't about him.
No, this movie isn't
about
him.
Andrew Largeman and his dealing.
And I do think it's a little bit unfair for the person who's writing this article to actually take Andrew's friend and say, like, he is in a terrible position. He seems fine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just his life.
Yeah.
It's not a life that a lot of us would like to have, but you know, maybe he'll work his way out of it. And again, it's not his movie.
It's not about him. Yeah. That's an interesting.
But it is kind of interesting that, like, for being a movie that's about the movie seems very self-absorbed, and like you get the impression that Zach Braff, who wrote, directed, and starred in this movie, kind of had the scene where they're screaming into the abyss, right?
The infinite
Excellent
abyss.
scene, the infinite
Love
abyss,
that, yeah.
and they're yelling at it. Wonderful scene, rain coming down.
I have the
I
poster
can't
in my
imagine.
office.
I'd hate to constantly keep filming that because it's pouring buckets on top of them. Whether it's fake or not, it's water. So they get done and they kiss, and then Andrew's friend, he just stares off into the distance. Like, it's such a poor shot.
It's weird.
Like, you can easily frame this shot in a different way by just saying, like, hey, let's just have your character looking it off in a different direction, like looking back at the trailer or something like that, and then they kiss, and it won't be awkward when we zoom the camera that way. But it does feel like, almost like Zach Braff looked at the shot and was so concerned about how he looked didn't even consider what his other actor was doing.
I'm glad you bring that up, because every time I have watched this movie, I've noticed that. And I'm gonna when I teach my classes and teach, video production, I'm like, if you can make an excuse for doing something, it's fair game. Like, if you have a reason for doing something, I'm gonna pretend that, because that's Sarsgaard.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pretend that he was looking away and looking awkward because he didn't have that moment of realization. He was like, I'm screaming with my friends, but this is not about me.
But like, every choice in a movie becomes a choice. Like, you're front and centering by accident because this guy's not in the center of the camera, but by him, like, looking past the two main characters, you're accidentally making the choice of saying, like, this guy doesn't have someone in his life right now. Like, that becomes the focus, which should not be the focus.
I'm glad you said that, because it is such a weird moment. And at times it takes away from that really, really awesome scene. And I love that the scene prior to that, when I forget who it is, but it's this guy and his wife, and they live they're basically the keepers of the quarry and make sure people don't go in there.
Yeah.
And they're just, it's almost like, oh, why do you live here? What is, and they're like, we like it here. This is what we want to do. And it's kind of another one of those, something I wish was explored more, but obviously this is not what this movie is about. But that idea of, like,
this movie is about an adventure ultimately. And to some extent, all these characters he comes across, we did an episode on Labyrinth. It's like the puppets in Labyrinth. It's just like, here we are, we're here to, like, be the next person to talk to and then move on to the next thing. Which unfortunately we just don't get any depth that way.
But
we get Andrew's experience, and we get a lot of it. Hey, while we're on that subject, was wondering, so they're on this adventure and they end up getting Andrew's mother's necklace back. Did you put together why it was in his possession in the first place?
Well, there's that scene, there's a shot earlier where he's like, his friend there, is it Peter Sarsgaard? Is that?
Yeah, it's Peter Sarsgaard as a character.
He's
He's an actor.
But he works in the graveyard digging graves,
Yeah.
and he's stealing jewelry. From the corpses.
You get the impression that, like, this was something he stole from his mother previously, then sold, then was like, maybe that's not such a great idea. And it's like he comes off as being like the good, nice friend.
He's
but
like, but why would that have ever been anywhere else other than his mom's casket?
I just find it really funny. There's just like, oh, you did me this one solid, and that's how they never really explore that at all. It's just like, yeah, he totally just stole from his mom, but then gave it back to him. It's a weird scene.
It is weird, because you're right, because they have to go through this whole thing to
get it back.
back. And then Method Man shows up. That's like that's the part of the movie where I'm like, I could have done without this weird peep show in the hotel thing.
I think that there's a lot of that where it's just like, you get the idea that like as a writer, he knew he wanted like to do some sort of adventure thing. And he put together a bunch of things, like he mentioned this was stuff he had heard about back home. So I get the feeling that he put together everything that sounded interesting and quirky that he heard about back home. But I got to agree, the entire hotel scene just seemed out of place for the movie.
There's another scene like that.
In place for a lot of movies.
Yes, but there's another scene like that too, and it's at the very beginning, which I love at the very, very beginning, where he's having this dream that he's in on a plane and it's crashing and everybody else is freaking out and he's just kind of like whatever. The alarm goes off and all that in this stark white room, which I love. Yeah. But then the next scene is just him getting ready to go to work at a restaurant, and that scene never
just doesn't play for you.
Doesn't work for me. I'm like, I already get visually from that first scene with the airplane that he's kind of like, all right, I'm really apathetic. And then I get from him being in his room in the stark white and, you know, getting the phone call from his dad that his mom has passed away. Like, I get all of that from those scenes. I don't need this other scene where he's just like, yeah, I'm a struggling actor. Like, I don't need that. So that one always comes across as weird to me.
We don't have much time left. Unfortunately, we're running out. But I got like one last question for you. Can you imagine where Andrew will end up being in 5 years?
Ooh.
I know it's a tough, difficult end question to go with.
I think, and I would like to think that, obviously he comes back and he stays, but I would like to think that was kind of like taking it slow. Yeah. He seems like that type of person that would just kind of let things unfold and kind of let Natalie Portman, Manic, Pixie, Dream Girl, maybe kind of lead the way for a little bit. And
do you think he's going to end up back in Hollywood, or do you think he's going to end up in New Jersey?
Ooh. Part of me wants him to stay, but it's already kind of been established that that's not his home anymore. So I would imagine he would go back at some point. I don't know.
It's interesting, something we never end up exploring.
And that's why I love it, because it just leaves it open-ended, and it makes you can just decide for yourself what happened and what you think would happen, and maybe put your own spin on it, and depending on the day, it might be different.
Yeah. Like unfortunately, we're out of time, so we're going to end up having to call this episode a wrap.
We didn't even eat our Sno-Caps.
Oh, geez, we skipped Sno-Caps.
We didn't even eat our Sno-Caps.
Quick, rush the Sno-Caps. Break them open.
We didn't even eat our Sno-Caps.
This is the first time I actually skipped the whole section.
We didn't even eat them. This is my favorite movie candy. I was too excited to talk about this movie.
We'll be eating these after we get done the show. And we'll have a great conversation about Sno-Caps, I'm quite sure. But if you like this episode, just subscribe to the channel or click like. I've been told that you should only tell people to do only one thing, so I'm going to tell you to do all of them. Go to community. Go to haverhillcommunitytv.org, check us out there, or like check us out on YouTube, and I don't know, click a bell or something like that. Go tell your friends about it. There's way too many things at this point. Anyhow, thank you for showing up. Come make a show at HC Media if you're interested in doing that, and take care. Bye-bye.